Okay, looks like, Celia, do you want to say a few words about the intention for this session, and maybe just you guys introduce your lovely initiative that we're kicking off with this session, and then I'll get started.
Sure, thank you, Charlie. So hello everyone, and welcome to today's discussion. Thank you for being here. This is our first event, so it means a lot that you're all here. So just a quick introduction for those of you who don't really know who we are. We are Climate Exchange, so our team is Felix, who is sitting beside me, Jen, and Ferdinand. And so some time ago, we came up with an idea to create a place to kind of explore topics that interest you all through debates or discussions. And then we were talking to Martin and Charlie, and we created this place called Climate Exchange. So the whole purpose of this is just to have sessions on topics that interest us and have debates and discussions and even panel experts. And so all of these sessions will be voluntary, of course, and informal. We aim to carry a session per week on very different topics, but yeah, it will depend, of course, on course load. So please do send us a message or an email if you have an idea or a topic that you would want us to explore in these sessions. And today we have the pleasure to have Charlie Donovan with us, who will start by introducing the topic. We will then have around 5 to 10 minutes of Q&A, and then we will allocate you to random breakout rooms to discuss. Then at the end, Charlie will wrap up the session. So as you can see on the title of the Zoom session, the topic today is the impact of the US elections on climate change. And just as a quick note, the session will be recorded so that it can be shared later with the students in different time zones. Also, before you start, if you have any questions throughout Charlie's introduction, please put them on the chat so that we can answer them afterwards in the Q&A session. So Charlie, if you want to start.
Okay, my pleasure. So hi, everybody. The intention for this, as the team has nicely put together, is to give, with the virtual environment, it's not so easy to just have sort of the side chats and whether it's at the pub or in the lunch hall or, in a more formal structured way, to kind of talk about things that are happening. So this is I think a nice chance to do that, and I appreciate they reached out to me for this first topic, which of course is close to my heart. So what I'll do is I'll give you some framing a little bit for those of you that know a lot about the US system. That'll be maybe a review. For those of you that don't, maybe they learn something, and that would be nice. But I'm going to keep that very short. So I'm going to talk here for about 10 minutes tops. And then if there's any questions, just people want to follow up. I did ask Celia to send out a link, so in case people wouldn't have seen it, maybe she could put it into the chat. It's just a kind of an overview of some of the legislative proposals that have been put forward or that people suspect will be part of the Biden climate plan. But of course, for any president, the task is to go from concepts into legislation, and that's the real task here. So what we'll do is we'll have 4 breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you a task to try to craft a legislative proposal around one of 4 areas, and you'll be able to pop in and out of these, but there'll be a rapporteur or somebody who will be owning that discussion room. And their idea, the task for them is to collect ideas, try to manage the discussion in a way that you can come out from that half hour of discussion. And again, you're free to kind of pop into different conversations if you like, but to come back with at least one well-crafted legislative proposal. And by well-crafted here, I mean, costed, thinking about also what are the potential obstacles, political and otherwise. So really to envision yourself as sort of Senate aides, if you will, who all ultimately have to kind of think this through when they start to draft language around going from policy concepts and moving into actual legislation. Who's going to get the money? Who's going to benefit? Where's the likely to be the sources of controversy and blowback? And how do we get this done? Okay, so that's kind of, we're going to try and simulate that, and it's tough because we have a short amount of time, but I hope to lead for an exciting discussion for you guys. And there's 4 topic areas, and Celia will point those out as she divides you up into the breakout rooms. Okay, so the basic format is I'm going to speak for a few minutes here. We can do a quick Q&A if there's any kind of points of curiosity. The majority of this is around discussion in breakout groups. There is a facilitator in each discussion room. And the output is to come back with at least one well-crafted proposal, legislative proposal, for how the U.S. Should address one of those 4 topic areas that we've put forward. Okay, so that's the kind of the setup, and I hope it's interactive, hope it's interesting, and hope it gets your mind thinking in a way that is hard to do if you're just sitting there reading about this stuff yourself. All right, so that's the plan, and so I guess a few kind of background comments I want to make, and I'll just, as many of you know, I worked for the Clinton administration. In the second administration, I was a climate and energy policy analyst at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and so I had a really unique opportunity at that time to get into what was a very niche area, and I feel really grateful that some amount of smooth talking, or I'm not even sure how it happened, but managed to find my way into a group that was managing economic forecasts around carbon pricing, and looking and trying to anticipate what those impacts would be. So in terms of what an administration needs to do, and this will be a big task of what happens in the new Biden administration, is that first you got to get the agency staffed with people who know what the game plan is. And so within the U.S. government, there are certain levels of positions which are reserved for political appointees, usually at the more senior level. And then there's going to be a career civil service, which is there, to support that. But in the U.S. system, it is not the executive branch. It's not the White House that actually makes legislation. That has to be done within the U.S. House of Representatives, and then it has to be voted on by the U.S. Senate. So in the U.S. we have a bicameral system of Congress, in which there is a House of Representatives, which is elected by population. So that's why you see it's a much bigger body. And then you have a U.S. Senate, which is elected by states. So there's 50 states and 2 senators per state, and that's how you get to 100. So this was in the design of the U.S. government. This was the idea about how to kind of balance the needs between populous states and least populous states. So that's the legislative branch, and that's really where things need to come from. So the executive branch is in a position, and the Biden administration, as we would call it, or any administration, is really responsible for the agencies, Department of Energy, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Interior, Housing, all these kinds of things. All of that is considered to be the executive branch. But the executive branch does not have, except for the White House, they have certain legal responsibilities and legal powers, particularly where those powers have been given to them by the U.S. Congress. But that's a very difficult interplay in the U.S. political system, is what powers are granted to the executive branch and what powers are reserved by the legislative branch, which is Congress. Okay, so there's one thing, just for those that are not well versed in the U.S. system, is that Biden doesn't just come in and say how it's going to be. This is a process of trying to find ways in which you can get support within the Congress, first within the House of Representatives and later in the Senate, for legislative programs. And why the executive branch plays quite a crucial role in that is that the president exercises potential veto. So the veto, if some legislation were to start and he or she did not like it, they can exercise a veto. And it's very hard for the U.S. Congress to override a veto. It takes much more than a majority. So this is the dance in which a new administration is trying to advance certain priorities, is trying to work particularly with the U.S. House of Representatives in order to generate legislation. That legislation needs to pass the Senate, which still is not in favor of the Democratic Party, is still held by the Republican Party, and will then need to be signed by the president. Okay, so this is the dance that has to be played, and this is why. Unlike a European parliamentary system, it's not just that those that in power that, okay, now we just try to push it through, right? This is a matter of actively having to find ways to get things done in a legislative system that you don't control entirely. The second thing just to mention as background is that there is a short window of opportunity. So every new administration kind of classically thinks about the first 100 days. And the first 100 days is literally the first 100 days of the administration after inauguration, in which it's kind of deemed that your power is at its maximum. And so this is the moment in which people will try, new presidents will try and pick just a few battles. So with Obama, it was healthcare, and climate actually sort of suffered later on. The question now will be what does Biden use in his first 100 days? Certainly, coronavirus response has got to be part of it, and he's signaled very clearly that will be the lead and economic recovery. So there's already a lot of, let's say, airspace that's going to be chewed up with that. So we've got to think that we're not going to have unlimited time for this, and there is also some fairly staunch opposition in the U.S. On the Republican side, particularly to climate action. It's going to be played out as taxes. It's going to be played out in all kind of a very well-known set of narratives that the government's trying to control your life, and that's something you need to be aware of as you think about these, which is responsive to what is likely to be that narrative that comes out from the other side, and how can you sort of find things that appeal to what we would say is across the aisle, to both Democrats and Republicans. So that's my civics lesson in a nutshell. And then finally, I'll just say to round that out that the U.S. Supreme Court, what role does it play? So the U.S. Supreme Court in this triangle of governance within the U.S. Is the judicial branch, and then like in a lot of countries, it would just exercise the clarification about what, in this case, a written constitution in the U.S. Would say about the legality or the constitutionality of different proposals, right? So things can be struck down, and in fact, at the moment, the big debate in the U.S. presidential election is whether the Affordable Care Act, which is also known as Obamacare, whether that would be, whether that would survive the U.S. Supreme Court. So we also have to be a little bit mindful, although it's pretty tricky to try to craft things, with that in mind, but that there is another arbiter ultimately, which usually doesn't rule on the merits of legislation, say new climate legislation or energy legislation, but would be in a position, and particularly a course of an avenue of challenge for those that may be opposed to it. Okay, so it's a complex system. It's a system that it's not very easy to get things done. That was kind of intentional by the people who set up the U.S. government, as they wanted it to be fairly inefficient so that nobody could kind of dominate it too quickly. And this, you have to remember, go back to the late 1700s. This was a rejection of monarchical power in Europe, and specifically in Britain. And a lot of what we have in the U.S. is kind of is an old system that functions in a lot of bizarre ways, and in a lot of ways because of what the main intention was to prevent the abuse of power by a single group or individual. All right, so that's kind of the background that maybe civics, U.S. Civics 101 in 10 minutes, but I think it's important so that for those that are not from the U.S. or haven't had a lot of exposure to that system, to know that you have got to be creative when you think about putting forward legislation. You've got to be creative in a way that wins over other people, either because you don't have the votes, or you're going to have to win votes, as is likely to be the case in the U.S. Senate, or every time you go against, a major sort of political force, you're likely to there's one kind of chop at the knees in terms of your ability to do the next piece of legislation. That comes back to like the observation about the 100 days. So this is something that you really need to think as much as you can about win-win across society in a way that is recognizable to a lot of people. And hopefully, the best kind of legislative proposals would not only get passed, but actually set you up for greater success in the future. So this is not some place to take your cheap shots. This is not some place to go, settling scores. This is unfortunately the real world of legislative policymaking, which requires a lot of compromise and a lot of thinking about and anticipating the response from the other side. Okay, so there's going to be these breakout rooms around topics, and the idea is, some of you will know a little bit more about the system, but ultimately we can, throw away the civics. What are the principles of how much do we have to spend? Who are we going to spend it towards? what kind of accomplishments are we going to have, and ultimately, how can we demonstrate that this provides value to taxpayers who ultimately are footing the bill for a lot of this. Okay, so I'm really looking forward to your creative ideas about how to move forward in an agenda, and then clearly the announcements that we've had over the last day from the UK government maybe provide some food for thought that you can bring into this conversation. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of framing. Are there any kind of quick questions people want to put up just to clarifying what we're here to do, or anything about that might be unclear about what I've just said? Lovely. Silence is golden. Silence is golden. So Celia, do you want to go ahead and explain about the breakout rooms and get people allocated to that? And then I'll see you guys. The idea is that the rapporteur will report back from each one of your discussions. We'll probably need to hold your discussions now to 25 minutes so that because we started 5 minutes late, in order to make sure that we get enough time to sum it all up. But so for the next 25 minutes, these discussion rooms will be open. And again, the task is to bring us back at least one very well-crafted legislative proposal on the topic that is the title of your breakout room.
Sure. Thank you, Charlie. So we're going to have 4 different topics. Every room has going to have a different name. So that 4 topics are overhauling transportation, land use and agriculture, net zero in the power sector, and transforming mobility. And the idea behind is just to discuss with everyone. You will be allocated to a random breakout room, and then you can choose to move to other rooms if you want to hear about other discussions, or if you're happy and very interested by your room, then you can just stay there. You will probably have around 20 to 25 minutes in the breakout room. And then, as Charlie said, the idea would be to come up with ideas on how to propose legislations valid in the US about climate change on these 4 different topics. So please bear with me while I send you to random groups. Okay, so now you are invited to join breakout room. So please choose the room. Can you see the different titles in the rooms?
See, on mine, I've only seen a number. So you might just to make it easy, you might need to do I don't know how you've ordered them, but it might not be that everybody sees the topic title with the number of the breakout room.
You're right. I thought, okay, sorry. Let me just close them and do it again. We can just go in.
Do you want to just I'll put it into the chat. If you just tell me what your numbers are, we can just leave it in the chat, and that way people can find out that way. So what would be, what's your room 1?
Sure, I can put it on the chat as well.
I'm still closing.
So 1, overhead transportation.
Which is, Celia, just tell me right now because I've got it already almost done. And if you just tell me the numbers, it'll be.
Okay, so 1 is overhauling transportation.
Okay.
2 is land use and agriculture. Then 3rd one is net zero in the power sector.
Right.
And 4th one is transforming mobility.
Well, it's not in order, but it goes in the chat. You can see room 4, industrial transformation, room 2, land use and agriculture, room 3, net zero in the power sector, room 1, transforming mobility.
Okay.
That was good. I enjoyed that, Celia.
Have you got it clear?
Yes, I'm just creating it 1 second.
Great. Okay, everyone, I'll see you back here in 25 minutes.
Thank you, Charlie. See you later. Hey, Dominic. I think you have to, did you get invited to Breakout Room?
Oh, I think she did.
Okay, no, it's
Okay, do we go to?
Celia, hi, it's Hannah.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi, you did well done. You guys can actually move to other so as hosts and co-hosts, you can move between the groups to make sure everyone's okay and that they're discussing. And you can always come back to the main room whenever. But I would always suggest someone, like one of you, to stay in the room at all times.
Okay.
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 So even if everyone else is going to go, just keep someone in the room here. With regards to the changing the titles of the breakout rooms, did you change them on the actual breakout room form and it didn't show up, or?
So at the beginning, I thought I did, but it didn't work. And then I closed all breakout rooms and it did work.
All right.
So
okay.
now I think it's working because I can see like the different titles when, I mean, at least I can see it, and I think they can see it as well. My only question is that I tick the box of everyone can choose freely their breakout rooms. I was just wondering if they can change it themselves, but I think they can.
They should be able to move to
Okay.
another breakout room, because I have the option here, because I'm not co-host, I can tell you what I'm seeing. I have join breakout room option at the bottom.
Okay, perfect.
I'm just gonna see, okay, so I have the option to join a breakout room, but I can only join land use and agriculture because that's when you assign me to. So they can't actually move between.
We can just go in.
So they can't move?
They can't move between the rooms.
Oh, okay, that's annoying.
Yeah, they can't
That's weird.
get in,
Okay.
but they
Okay,
can.
and because you're not a co-host, could you try like going to a breakout room and seeing if you can move yourself to another one, just to make
Alright.
sure that it's not. Thank
Sure.
you. And then come back and tell us.
Yeah.
Or send me a message.
Sure.
Thank you.
No worries.
Celia, if you want to just pause the recording, because I know it's going to be 25 minutes and you're probably going to record this.
Oh. Okay, I think we're all back, Charlie.
Okay, good. So should we just go for a group? Should we just go right in turn? And we'll need to do this quickly so we get them all out there. Group one, do you want to tell us what your, if you managed to get to a proposal and sketch it out for us? Who's the reporter from group
Can
one?
you mention who's, like, what subject it is, because we can.
Yes, it's transforming mobility. Room one was transforming mobility.
I can jump in. Actually, it was breakout room 4, but I can jump in. I
Okay.
think, yeah, we didn't get to like a plan as detailed as what you were demanding, Charlie. But like, so we identified like public transport, greener mobility as two key areas here for transport. And so, for example, public transport is bad between cities and within cities. So to rebuild railroads, maybe certain state funds could be allocated to railroads for each state. In terms of greener mobility, well, the key here is to move to EV cars. So each state could have a subsidy for greener transport. But the problem here is that oil and gas lobbies are quite strong. So maybe the key argumentation for Biden could be that the US should generally, try to compete with China in terms of greener energies. And so that could be the overall argumentation to try and push for greener EV vehicles
Right.
in all states. So these were some of the ideas we had.
Okay, cool. So just again, kind of to push it one step further, if you think about all of the, one key question is going to be, how are you going to craft a proposal around changing the charging infrastructure in the US, right? And is that going to happen? Is that going to happen a new network, or are you going to think about something? And again, kind of, something to explore. A lot of these things come down to some form of subsidy or tax break or something to, say, existing petrol fill stations to allow them to incorporate the new infrastructure, whatever it is, right? So there's everything, there's a giveaway somewhere, and that's, your infrastructure thing is probably going to have to think about how to, what's the incentive so that you can get existing, there's a huge network of thousands of gas stations across the US. You don't want to leave them out in the cold. So you're gonna have to do something to bring them into this, yeah?
Yeah,
Good.
we thought incentives. I mean, we could give incentives to car manufacturers to move to EV, and so this would.
The thing with that one is it's going to be expensive, right? And it's also, people hate, just again, think about, this is not just the US, but the forces, the political forces. Do you want to you're as the government giving more money to car manufacturers? Well, that works well in areas where you have a lot of jobs associated with car manufacturing, but not so hot in places that don't, right? So these are the kind of things to think about. How do you pick your battles in a way that finds sort of political support? Good. Okay, that's off to a good start. I'm sure we could have gone a lot, and there's a lot more to explore on that. How about group 2 or room 2? Cynthia says she loves trains. I love trains too. Room 2 was land use and agriculture. What's your big giveaway for agriculture to get it closer to carbon neutral?
Oil. So our big takeaway was to subsidize the large agricultural producers to pursue more regenerative agriculture. Particularly looking at R&D subsidies there. What that would look like in reality would be investments in permaculture and agroecology to encourage diversification of crops, so utilizing mutually beneficial relationships between species instead of chemicals to result in a more natural growth of crops. And we also thought the message would be quite important, framing it as to how it helps farmers, particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, not how it helps the environment, because that probably starts getting involved in political lines and what people believe about climate change.
Right. Okay, good. So there's something interesting that I heard you say, talking about small farms, small landowners, right? Because you really need to think about the optics of this. As soon as you've got a program in which you're getting Monsanto and Bayer and some of the big companies involved, and they're hoovering up all this sort of tax subsidy, that's a disaster. That's not what you want running on the front of the paper. So how, the mythology, even if it's still a myth, of small farms, small farmers, all that kind of stuff, there's an interesting narrative to tap into, right? Because the Bush administration put through a thing around ethanol for growing a lot more corn. It didn't do a damn thing for climate, but it was one of the most popular programs that Bush put in place, right? So we have to know that, yeah, this is going to take the agricultural lobby is very strong and all around the world. And it's going to take some real thought about how you do this in a way that you get it done, but doesn't lead to some really negative outcomes in terms of big business just sort of, sucking up at the trough of tax subsidies. Okay, so I think you got some interesting ideas there, but it's going to take a lot of refinement to figure out how to place that correctly. Good. Okay, that was group 2, land use and agriculture. How about group 3, the power sector?
Hi, yeah. So our group was talking a lot about having a just transition with the coal and fracking communities. We discussed various approaches to do this. One is bottom up, and so basically taking like, or I guess top down sort of, approaching the industries and the people who own the infrastructure, putting legislations on them, like pollution legislation on them, and then sort of instilling a trickle down effect, like they would have to pollute less. This, I think, would give more opportunity for employees to, wait, actually, I'm reading my notes wrong. This is kind of confusing. But we wanted to make things state specific, and we also wanted to ensure a transition into renewables. We thought that these conversations needed to have local communities and unions in them. And so we're trying to support dialogues between them with local governments, and also providing funding and guidance from the federal government. We talked a little bit about subsidy programs for coal workers. We talked a little bit about stimulus packages and taking some of that revenue that we make from renewable energy, for example, and putting them back into these vulnerable communities. And someone in our group also mentioned that like the whole marketing idea around this is energy independence. Like, although the US is already energy independent because of fracking, showing others that like fracking eventually will not be as like profitable, and also that we can also achieve energy independence from renewables. So there's like that security aspect.
Good. Okay, so 2 things I'll flag that I heard there that sound really promising. Definitely some political stars in your group there. The first thing is you got to go with this. You got to figure out what you're going to do with the coal communities. You've got to have a plan there, because this is even though that's not a lot of people, you can do as many economic studies as you want about renewables does more jobs than coal or whatever. I don't care about any of that. They make, killing coal communities. Trump had a very powerful thing around that, and it's a very, you've got to attack that first. You can't, and the second thing I heard you say is that around the flexibility, it might be that some states are going to really go for this and some states aren't. If the tension there will be within the environmental community is that they're going to want some certainty that we're going to get to, this outcome. And the other side of it is, well, we need flexibility to figure out how we get there, because we can't undo all of the progress just to ensure that one state, Nebraska, for the sake of argument, goes 100% renewables. We just can't. That's just counterproductive. So there's going to be a tension in there about how to provide some amount of overall certainty about what the aim is, while providing a maximum amount of flexibility, so that you don't have to waste your political capital dealing with people who just don't want to do it. And that's probably it. So I think that's a very astute observation that you guys had there about working at the state level. So that's really good. Thank you for your input. How about the last one, room 4? Who's, let's see, where's room 4? Room 4 was around industrial transformation.
I think there might have been a problem if no one did industrial transformation. Okay, so I think one group got assigned transport for some reason.
We were 4 and we had transport.
Okay, yeah. So together. Okay, so the good thing is that we've learned. So you've helped your classmates here figure out a few things about how the logistics of this thing is going to run, and I'm sure that they will benefit from that and continue to refine that. So that's one great outcome from today. The second I'll just say as we go, because it's getting to be 5 o'clock, and just to say is that it's really worth, whether it's the US or whether it's Europe or whether it's China or whatever it is, I think it's really useful, in the program that we run, you guys, we take a very global perspective on everything, right? The economics of the economics, the finance is the finance, the management strategies, these are all very global sort of contexts. And I think that there's a real complementarity that you can build for yourself by being an expert in some regional political system, right? And I think people, no matter whether you're going to end up working in Europe or the US or Mexico or whatever it is, I think people have a real respect for that sort of depth of understanding. So I would really encourage you as you go along in your program, is almost to pick a part of the world, pick some obscure part of the world, and get to grips with how energy policy and climate policy is playing out in that area. I think it's a very useful thing to be able to go away from the abstract of the principles that we tend to deal with, within a master's class like this, into the real issues associated with, making it happen on a local or regional scale. So we just encourage, if this kind of thing appeals to you, I think it can be an enormously beneficial thing for interviews, just for your own kind of building your own awareness of the challenge to really spend some time and get invested in some of these very small challenges around specific communities and the political dynamics of getting these things done at a local scale. So with that, I think we've hit 1 hour on the mark, and thank you to the team for getting us started. I hope this is a great initiative, and we'd love to see kind of new things like this come up. So it's been my pleasure to help you kick off, and we'll leave it to them to close out.
Thank you, Charlie. So thank you all for being here today with us for our first event. We hope you enjoyed your evening and had interesting discussions in your breakout rooms. Next Wednesday, we will have Neil Jennings, who is actually one of our professors next term, to talk about how we can change our individual behavior to have a low carbon footprint. So we'll send you an email shortly with the details, but it will surely be on Wednesday at 5 p.m. So thank you again for everything, and have a nice evening.
Bye-bye. Bye.